So last week we talked about kind of the broad general definition of leadership and how leadership works as a process and how there are different characteristics that need to be present for leadership to be possible. The trait approach will be talking more about specific traits people have that allow them to be good leaders, and we'll talk about how the trait approach differs. The trait approach was one of the first systematic attempts to study leadership. So this idea of the trait theory or trait approach was kind of the first ideas of the attempt to really record and study leadership. This is where it kind of all started. So you'll see in the next few slides how there are some bits of information that are a little bit dated. Some of the theories that were developed were called the great man theory. And it's because it focused on identifying the innate qualities and characteristics possessed by great society, political, and military leaders. So they're kind of not looking at situations or behavior or anything other than just what sorts of traits did these people have. There was previously a belief that people were born with these traits and that only great people could possess them. So the idea that you can't like train or help develop someone into the leader, but instead they were just born that way and you had to be lucky enough to be born with those traits. So that's kind of where the theory started out, is there are these great aspects of some people. Usually they characterize men as these people, and they believe that you were born that way. It's not something that you could develop later in life. So there's a major review done by Stodel in 1948, and it suggested that there's no consistent sets of traits that differentiated leaders from non-leaders across a variety of situations. So rather being a quality that an individual possesses, leadership was reconceptualized as the relationship between people in a social situation. So after that major review, and they found that there was no validity really in traits being an effective marker to tell if they're good leaders or bad leaders, or you can be a leader, that sort of stuff, they moved on to looking at leadership between people and how leadership in different situations changed how people felt and how the situation was changed. So instead of just being, oh, yep, you're super charismatic, you're a good leader, it became more about how the leader affected people. So it started with identifying qualities of a great person, then it shifted to the impacts of a situation on leadership, and currently it's shifted back to reemphasizing the critical role traits of effective leadership. So they went from looking at traits and seeing who had what traits and if that made them a good leader. Then they figured there weren't really any consistent evidence about that, so they scrapped that and they said, okay, let's just look at how leaders affect people and situations. And then now we're kind of backpedaling and looking at, okay, there are some traits that appear more often and appear in more effective leadership roles. Now we kind of look at trait of a leader, but that's not just the whole story. We also have to look at the situation and how those traits and how the leader used those traits and how that affects people. So it's really not a straight line. There's a lot of different aspects of people, and I'm sure you can guess that by just like understanding people and how people hold relationships and just even relationships with your friends. It's not always like this linear line. It's very simple. There are lots of different things that affect relationships between people. And then even more so when it comes to a situation where you're trying to use that relationship in an effective way to benefit business.